Okay, so now the next thing that Gray omits is Matthew 5, verses 17 to 19 are clearly anti-Paul. So he doesn't really address this. Let's see what he does say. Furthermore, Gray omits any serious mention that the most important canonical work of Anti-Paulinism is actually the book of Matthew, which means either Jesus or Matthew are critics of Paul. It has to be one or the other. Gray tepidly introduces the topic, saying that Matthew's gospel has a, quote, attracted attention as anti-Pauline. Not that it is or isn't. It's just attracted attention. That's a Kindle location 544. And this could not escape Gray's attention because he actually found the following major scholarly article with the word Anti-Paulinism in the title on this topic. Matthew's Anti-Paulinism, a neglected feature of Matthean studies. This is by David C. Sim from the School of Theology, the Australian Catholic University Research Associate, Department of New Testament Studies from 2002. In this work, Sim concludes, quote, the presence of anti-Pauline texts in Matthew's Gospel point inevitably towards the conclusion that the evangelist himself, and I put in here, seek, meaning wrong, Jesus himself, not the evangelist, was anti-Pauline, because that's who's inspired the words of Matthew. So I disagree to make that thing. So this is from Jesus, but, he says from Matthew. Gray, however, discusses only one anti-Paul passage among a long list that Sim found in Matthew. See our list of anti-Paul passages based upon Sim's article at this link. So I'm going to just see if there's a possibility I could put that in here for a second. Well, indeed, it does show up. In fact, it perfectly aligns. So you have 5:17:19, and then you've got fulfillment in Paul on the other side. Jesus is prophesying there. 5:20. So we've done this thing on 5:17:19 already in our recent episode. But basically, Jesus is prophesying about a person named the least, and Paul's name is Pauxilolus, which in Latin means least. Here it is, Pauxilolus. That's what it is, means least, and we have an article on that. Matthew 5:20. Jesus says your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees. Paul, on the other hand, teaches if you try to be right with God by obeying the law, you are severed from Christ. I'm a Pharisee. Okay, so 5:20 is critical of Paul because he says I'm still a Pharisee. Okay, so then you've got Matthew 7:15. Jesus talks about take heed of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing and inwardly are ravening wolves. And this ties in with Genesis 49:27. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. And Ezekiel 22:26. The wolves teach you what? Don't worry about what's clean and unclean, and they hide their eyes from Sabbaths. And then Paul says, I'm a Benjamite. And what else? And then Paul, like the priests of the ravening wolves in Ezekiel 22:26, teach the Sabbath is abolished. Paul teaches the same thing. Okay, Matthew 7:21-23. Jesus says, if you call me Lord, Lord, that's not enough. If you teach against if you teach anomia, basically you negate the law of Moses. I'm going to say I don't know you. Paul, on his side, it has signs and wonders. Exactly fitting this. He preaches anomia, basically works the law of God. He even says, I work to appear anomos. I mean, he even uses the word anomos around those who are Gentiles because I'm not under the law. In the next verse, Paul defends being all things to all men to fit in with their morals, 1 Corinthians 9:22. Paul casts out demons in the name of Jesus, but those who tried to cast out demons in the name of the Jesus who Paul preaches could not, meaning the Jesus who Paul preaches is actually not Jesus, so that name isn't powerful, but Paul could cast out demons when he just used the name Jesus. Interesting. Matthew 10:28, do not take wages without cost you receive, without cost you give. Paul says, I've robbed other churches. So you were supposed to preach and teach without taking money. Paul says, I robbed churches to get wages. And then he uses, he claims there's the people who run the church are worthy of double honor of getting paid for that. When Jesus said, you're not supposed to take any wages without cost you receive, without cost you were to give. Jesus gave you a different way, pastors. He told you to go into people's homes and become a guest, and then you can earn wages by helping them in the household to take care of animals. Anyway, there's a whole lot more. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I'm not doing it justice. Maybe we'll go through this another time. Okay, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to put this on pause and go back. Okay, so you can see that there was a lot of arguments that could have been discussed by Mr. Gray but weren't discussed, and he only picked one, and then he's not going to understand what he's even dealing with correctly. We're going to take a look at that. So what does he say? Gray decided to expand upon Matthew 5, verse 17 to 19. Here is a 100% certain critique of Paul in Matthew 5, 17 to 19, but Mr. Gray is going to find a way not to see it. Just letting you know right up front. Jesus actually uses the Greek word lykthos to identify the lawless teacher whom Jesus condemns by his personal name, translated as least in English. This turns out to be Jesus calling out Paul by name. Once you were informed that lykthos in Greek, this is key, means the same as Paul's name of Paulus in its non-contracted form. This is what Mr. Gray leaves out, that Paul's name in Greek, in Latin, means least, or can mean least, and that's what Augustine recognized was Paul's purpose in saying that 1 Corinthians was Paul saying, I'm the least of the apostles, meant to allude to his true birth name, which really only Jesus, his parents, and Paul knows his birth name was least, and instead of Pauxalis, which would have meant lesser. So he could use Paulus for either of those two names, lesser or least, but he used Paulus to reflect, obviously, the name least, because that's the name he was playing on with his little joke, inside joke, saying, I'm the least of the apostles, as Augustine recognized. Okay, so Gray made it appear, let's see what Gray says here. Rather than spot the main issue, Gray simply says the connection between Matthew 5:17 and verses 17 and 19 and Paul is between Paul's self-identification of himself as least in 1 Corinthians 15:9 and Jesus' condemning the law-negating teacher as being called the least or lekistone in Matthew. And this is Kindle 556. This is wrong. So what he's done is said he's ignored that Paul's name in Latin means least, and he's just said, all this is a connection with Paul saying, I am the least of the apostles, and then somebody coming along and saying, see, Jesus said the lekistone is the anti-law teacher. And that would be still a problem, but nothing like what we really have, which is Paul's actual name means the least in Latin. And that's why you know that this is an amazing prophecy of the Lord Jesus Christ. So let's read my comment on that. Gray made it appear just a matter of coincidence between the false law-negator teacher who is called Elekiston and the self-identification of Elikistos by Paul. Gray did not point his reader to the fact Jesus was calling out Paul by the word meaning of Paul's Latin name. That's what he's trying to leave out. And could he not know this? So there, if you read all the critical commentary on this, and I don't mean critical like anti-Paul, I mean high-level commentary like you would get in a theological course, they all mention that this reason this is important is that the word for Paulus is in Latin means least, and that's how come this is significant. It's not just a coincidence. It's because Paul's actual name, it does mean least. It's not simply because he used the word least. I'm the least of the apostles. That's not what made him, that's not what triggers this all by itself. It's the fact that his name, his actual name, Paulus, means least. So to me, this was a terrible treatment. How can I put it? Any other than that? So as I point out, it was Christian scholars in the 1900s took it further and easily connected Matthew 5:17, verse 19, to the law-negating teacher, because we know that Pauxalis in Latin means least, and that contracts to Paulus. Then we know this shortens in Latin to Paulus, which we then shorten further to Paul. This is what Sim was referencing. How did Gray miss that Gray was referencing this, but just reduced it into just a coincidence between what Augustine was saying and what Jesus was saying. Just a coincidence that the anti-law teacher is called least in Matthew 5, verse 17, 19, and Paul refers to himself as least of the apostles. I mean, to miss this huge point is terrible. And also, I think it lets down people from knowing that Jesus gave a highly prophetic proof of foreknowledge, because there's no way anybody but Jesus, his parents, Paul's parents, or Paul himself knew that Paul's birth name was, of the two possibilities, was Pauxalis, which means least, There's no way anybody else would know. And so if Paulus would not tell you for sure that Paul's birth certificate name was Pauxilus, or excuse me, Pauxilolus, you could think it would be Pauxilus, which would mean lesser. And people called themselves sometimes the lesser son, the least son. They had all kinds of reasons. Latin people, Roman people did that with their kids. Oh, you're the least one. You're the lesser one. So it was like a way of remembering which kid came first and who came last, and so on. Okay, so I think let's see where we are. Okay, we'll do Apocalypse of Peter separately, and you're going to enjoy that. It's, by the way, used to be part of canon, so don't run away. It's a real book. It was a real book for over 350 years. So we'll read it, and maybe you'll know why now it was taken out, because it has a reference to Paul for sure.